ECIC, your export risk partner. ECIC, your export risk partner.
Political risk is one of the biggest components. When we provide cover, we give 100% political risk cover. So we have a very keen interest in a country's stability. So we have a research unit that goes into the countries on a regular basis and does on-the-ground research to make sure that what the desktop is showing us is actually reflected on the ground. And that research is very detailed, and when they come back, we make a decision: can we not go in? Now, in most cases, we've gone into a country and done business. We tend to shy away from active conflict zones. So, if there's an active war or civil disturbance that is ongoing, then we will normally not go in. However, we've got certain countries where you'll find that there's a conflict that is concentrated in a particular region, but the rest of the country is stable. So we sort of go, if we have to go in and our exporters are keen to do business in the safer zone, then we go in. As long as other variables in terms of governance are intact, then we go in.
What are some of the most memorable case studies of a successful conduction of business in any part of where ECIC does business?
Case studies, we've got a few, and I'll zone in on one, which was a gold mine in Kazakhstan. A South African exporter was involved in constructing a plant to mine gold. And the miner who was doing the mining was a junior miner and was not very knowledgeable in terms of where to drill when. And the initial drilling started giving very low ore grades. And this was not sustainable. They couldn't repay the debt, and we paid a claim on that mine. Luckily, we had the mine sold to another miner who had better knowledge of the region, and they were doing what you call targeted mining. And with this targeted mining, they were able to strike richer ore grades, and they were able to pay the debt. As ECIC, we got repaid 100% of what we'd paid out as a claim, which was a very, I would say, an eye-opener. Because most of the time you want to stick with a project, and restructure and restructure and restructure, while it sometimes makes sense to just cut your losses and then try to work it out. And in this case, that worked. Mm-hmm. Having said that, we still are a strong believer of restructuring. Most of our projects have a longer tail, so you'll find that if there is affordability issues up front, we can stay the long haul and see it out. And I think that is the value that ECIC brings to the table. We keep the commercial banks who are often involved in our projects happy, because they have to make sure that their books are not, they don't have a lot of delinquencies in their books. So if we can restructure, stay on in the long haul, then we make them whole.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, you have mentioned that the commodity sector is a particularly difficult one to navigate because the sector is cyclical. But in your opinion, what are some of the other sectors that you would consider risky, and also some of the sectors that are safe, good sectors to invest in?
Okay, from our point of view, we've categorized our business, the export business, into two, where we've got predominantly commodity-based exports, and we've got infrastructure-based exports. So if you compare this to, by sheer nature of the industries, commodities have that cyclicality, and we recognize that. And that gives us, or rather heightens, the risk of affordability, where a buyer may not be able to repay a debt. Now, there are some of the mitigants that we bring in is to make sure that if the plant is going to export a certain metal, we try to make sure that there is fixed contract in terms of volumes as well as price. It's not always easy, but we try to get that as much as we can. So if you've got the offtake side of that taken care of, you are sort of hedged to a certain extent. There are some exports that you can't get fixed volume in terms of offtakes, and those ones we have to live with. The benefit or the value that we bring in is we can, because commodities will slump for maybe a year, 2 years, and then start picking up. So we can ride those waves and troughs, and I think that is the value that we bring in. The safer side, which is the infrastructural side, is normally backed by government. You find that the infrastructure has got local interest, so it's got political value. So governments tend to make sure that these don't fail. The governance around the infrastructural project is strong, and those are pretty much safe for us, and they tend to be big, involving multinational operators, so nobody really wants to rock the boat too much, so they tend to be quite safe. But we've got the middle ground, which maybe I have to mention. We've got other real estate projects, and those in our portfolio, I think, they represent a very small percentage, but they are a bit risky. They depend on local business people trying to set up a hotel, a local hotel. The governance around project financing is normally weak, so there's a lot of hand-holding. The structures are not very clear, as opposed to a big, say, plant producing metal. And those have caused some pain to us. But as I mentioned, we have the ability to always stay on in the long haul. And then when hotel projects are completed, you have the occupancy issue, and sometimes you have a hotel glut where 6 hotels are being built in the same region at the same time. So those are risks that we've seen in that particular sector. But it's a small percentage of our portfolio, and it's not too significant.
ECIC, your export risk partner. ECIC, your export risk partner.
We spend a lot of time on the ground. We are reaching out to a lot of the export credit councils. We informing them, as well as advisory firms. So we've targeted institutions that we know are quite active in cross-border activities, private investors, etc. We inform them of our availability to partner with them, to go alongside them as they go and they pitch for transactions, or if it's required in the form of a letter of support, we also provide that if it helps in terms of opening doors and demonstrating that the government backing to support the transaction is there. As a team, we also go into the markets ourselves and meet various players from state-owned entities, the ministries of finance and infrastructure development, especially because obviously on the continent that's where the gaps are, and you always need obviously the backing of the host country and the government to support the projects that you wish to undertake. So we are taking a role of being first to the opportunity, and if we create an opportunity, we bring it back to the market share those opportunities with the financial institutions, the manufacturers, and other service providers that can be a part of effectively SA Inc. to bring a solution to that host country.
Once you've undertaken a project in a host country, how do you then make sure that the environment in which you operate is a conducive environment?
So, as ECIC, what we're trying to do is to support South African companies as they go into the region, to give them the best opportunity possible so that they're competitive and they're able to offer competitive terms. When we provide cover to either the exporter directly or to the financial institution that is lending to the buyer of the South African goods and services, we are effectively giving the South African government backing to the project. It means that for an exporter, they can offer not only goods, but also goods plus a financing package. And for a buyer, it means that it increases their credit lines and their credit limits, because it doesn't consume or cannibalize their existing credit lines with the banks, because the lending institutions will effectively substitute the risk of the project with that of South African government. We cannot really play a role in terms of making that market more conducive, but the concerns that one may have around the political risks is what we're actually wrapping and covering with our participation in the project. For political risk, we're covering issues like currency and convertibility, change of law, nationalization, expropriation, civil war and disturbances, the things that could affect a company from a political perspective, from in terms of successfully executing their business. And we also cover, obviously, commercial risk insurance, so insolvency and protracted default. So what we do is not really transform the landscape, but it's almost evening the playing ground to enable South African companies to go and do business in those regions.
Right, and as you even that playing ground, how important is the forging of partnerships and maintaining good partnerships to make sure that business is conducted successfully each time?
Well, that's the essence of the ECIC, because as a state-owned entity, we rely on those relationships from government to government to enable us to, that's what gives us the confidence to cover the projects because of our relationships on the continent. And also, it's with the market and building that trust with the market, that when things go wrong and they've called on our policy, that we will actually pay them out. So that trust and those relationships are crucial, because if they cannot trust in our paper, then they wouldn't come to us for cover. So it's definitely a crucial aspect of what we do.
Mm-hmm. What are the current trends that you're seeing as you do business across the continent? Is Africa really open for business? Are they open to engaging with the likes of ECIC?
Absolutely. I think everywhere we've gone to, we've been warmly received, and positively so, because it shows in our pipeline, it shows in the opportunities that sovereigns are willing to open up and share with us. Of course, the challenge still, in terms of doing business, is how we move across the continent, your visas and the restrictions in terms of travel, the lack of infrastructure in some parts, and obviously there's some areas which still require development. There are countries that have experienced civil war in the past, so those challenges in terms of infrastructure is what sometimes perhaps hampers the business. But I think that's why we're there, because we recognize that there is a need, and we don't shy away from those difficult situations. We see ourselves as a facilitator and an enabler for the financial markets, as well as the South African exporters, to enable them to get into those opportunities and execute them successfully.
ECIC, your export risk partner. ECIC, your export risk partner.